It's the morning of October 25, 1944, and Commander Ernest Evans stands on the bridge of his destroyer, the USS Johnston. Through the gray dawn haze off the coast of Samar Island, Philippines, a reconnaissance pilot's frantic voice crackles over the radio. 4 battleships. 8 cruisers. At least a dozen destroyers. The entire Japanese center force, bearing down on 6 defenseless escort carriers and the invasion fleet beyond. Evans grips the railing as shells from the world's largest battleship, the Yamato, begin to fall around his tiny ship. 72,000 tons of steel and fury against 2,700 tons of tin can. His destroyer carries 5-inch guns that fire 54-pound shells. Yamato's main battery fires shells that weigh more than a small car. The math is simple, brutal, inevitable. But Evans, a Cherokee from Oklahoma who fought his way through prejudice to command his own warship, has already decided what he's going to do. Without waiting for orders, he turns to his helmsman and gives the command that will define the next 3 hours: left full rudder. Flank speed. All ahead full. If this is how Claude helps you create YouTube content, consider supporting more videos by liking and subscribing. Every bit of engagement helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. The battle off Samar shouldn't have happened. Admiral William Halsey's powerful Third Fleet, with its fast battleships and fleet carriers, was supposed to be guarding San Bernardino Strait. But the Japanese had laid a trap. A decoy carrier force to the north had lured Halsey away, leaving only Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague's Task Unit 77.4.3, call sign Taffy 3, between the Japanese fleet and the American landing beaches at Letta Gulf. 6 escort carriers, designed to provide air support for ground troops, not fight surface battles. 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. That's it. That's all that stood between Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's armada and catastrophe. The escort carriers are laughably vulnerable. They're converted merchant hulls with wooden flight decks, capable of barely 18 knots. Their thin skin can be penetrated by destroyer shells, let alone battleship guns. Each carrier holds about 1,000 men and 30 aircraft. Behind them, in Letta Gulf, sit hundreds of transports and landing craft, and over 130,000 American soldiers who've just hit the beaches. If Kurita breaks through, the invasion dies. The soldiers die. The Philippines remain in Japanese hands, and the war in the Pacific extends by years. At 6:50 in the morning, Johnston is at the rear of Taffy 3's circular formation, 34,000 yards from the approaching Japanese fleet. Evans has been expecting this moment since he took command of Johnston at her commissioning exactly 1 year ago, on October 27, 1943. On that day, standing before his assembled crew in Seattle, he'd made a promise. This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now. The men had cheered. Now, harm's way has arrived with mathematical precision. The Japanese open fire at 6:58. Shells begin falling among the carriers, towering geysers of water erupting in patterns of color. Red dye, green dye, yellow dye. So each ship can spot the fall of its own salvos. Admiral Sprague orders the carriers to flee east at maximum speed and tells his escorts to lay smoke. Evans doesn't wait for the smoke order. Johnston is already turning, already accelerating. Black oil smoke pouring from her stacks as she positions herself between the carriers and the enemy. The crew knows what's coming. Gunnery officer Robert Hagan later remembers thinking they felt like David without a slingshot. But Evans isn't planning to hide. Within minutes, Johnston is zigzagging at 35 knots through the smoke, heading not away from the Japanese fleet but straight toward it. The gun crews don't need orders. They've trained for this. Johnston's 5 5-inch guns can reach out to 18,000 yards, about 10 miles. The Japanese heavy cruisers outrange them. The battleships outrange them by double. For 20 agonizing minutes, Johnston charges forward while enemy shells bracket her, unable to fire back, watching the colored splashes creep closer. At 7:10, the range closes to 18,000 yards. Evans has singled out his target, the heavy cruiser Kamano, leading a column of cruisers toward the carriers. Kamano displaces over 15,000 tons, carries 10 8-inch guns, and is armored against shells far larger than anything Johnston carries. But Johnston isn't trying to sink her with gunfire alone. Johnston is trying to get close enough to use her real weapons. Torpedoes. Commence firing. Evans orders, and Johnston's 5-inch battery erupts. For the next 5 minutes, Johnston fires like a possessed thing. Over 200 rounds pour out of her guns, and the gun crews move with practiced fury, loading, firing, firing, the deck vibrating with each salvo. The shells arc across the water and slam into Kumano's superstructure. Fires break out. Gun mounts are destroyed. At least 45 shells find their mark, and Kumano's sister ship Suzuya begins firing back. But incredibly, not a single Japanese shell hits Johnston during this sprint. The smoke, the speed, the radical maneuvering, something is protecting her. At 10,000 yards, Evans gives the order, fire torpedoes. Johnston swings broadside and releases all 10 of her Mark 15 torpedoes. 10 fish, each carrying 663 pounds of Torpex explosive, swimming through the water at 46 knots. Then Evans yanks the ship around and dives back into her own smoke screen. Kumano sees them coming. 3 torpedoes, tracking straight for her bow. She tries to turn, tries to comb the wakes, but she's too slow and they're too close. At 7:27, at least 1, possibly 2 or 3, torpedoes slam into Kumano's bow. The explosion is catastrophic. The entire bow section, from the waterline to the forecastle, simply ceases to exist. The heavy cruiser, Kurita's Cruiser Division flagship, is instantly crippled, her speed reduced to 15 knots, flooding uncontrollably. Suzuya breaks formation to escort the shattered Kumano out of the battle. First blood. The little destroyer, the tin can that shouldn't even be in this fight, has just taken out a heavy cruiser 7 times her weight. But there's no time to celebrate. Because Yamato has noticed. At 7:30, from a range of 20,300 yards, over 11 miles, the battleship Yamato opens fire with her main battery. 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever mounted on a warship, trained on what her spotters identify as an enemy cruiser. In reality, it's Johnston, emerging from the smoke. The Japanese have made a terrible mistake. They've loaded armor-piercing ammunition, designed to penetrate the thick belt armor of battleships and heavy cruisers. Johnston has no armor. She's a destroyer. Her hull is thin steel plate, built for speed, not protection. When Yamato's first salvo arrives, 3 massive shells, each weighing over 3,000 pounds, pass completely through Johnston's hull without detonating. They're going too fast, hitting a target too thin. The armor-piercing fuses don't have time to arm. The shells punch neat holes going in, ragged tears going out, and keep going into the ocean beyond. But 3 shells don't miss. 3 6.1-inch shells from Yamato's secondary battery, still massive by destroyer standards, slam into Johnston's superstructure. 1 hits amidships, obliterating an anti-aircraft director. 2 more smash into the forward section. The torpedo director disintegrates. The bridge becomes a slaughterhouse. Metal fragments and splinters scythe through the command crew. Commander Evans is standing near the ship's control station when the shells hit. The blast tears off 2 fingers from his left hand and rips his shirt completely off his body. Blood soaks the deck. Men scream. The gyro compass is destroyed. And then the 18-inch shells that pass through without exploding do their damage anyway. 2 hit amidships, deep below the waterline, tearing massive holes in the engineering spaces. The port engine room floods. Power to the after gun mounts dies. Johnston's speed bleeds away from 35 knots to 17. A third massive shell hits 2/3 of the way down the ship, severing power lines to all remaining guns. Johnston is crippled, mortally wounded, dead in the water, for all practical purposes. Blood runs from the scuppers. Smoke pours from her wounds. Yamato's lookouts report sinking an enemy cruiser at 7:28. But Evans is still conscious, still standing, still in command. He refuses medical treatment, ordering the pharmacist's mate to tend to the other wounded first. The pain must be extraordinary. 2 fingers gone, burns, lacerations, but he shows nothing. He moves to a less damaged part of the bridge and starts giving orders. Get power restored to the forward guns. Get steering control shifted to aft. Get this ship back in the fight. The crew responds like they've been electrified. In the smoke and rain squalls that providentially appear, Johnston's damage control parties work miracles. They bypass destroyed systems, jury-rig power connections, and within 10 minutes of desperate labor while the battle rages around them, Johnston's forward guns come back online. It's not enough. Not nearly enough. But it's something. At 7:50, Admiral Sprague orders his destroyers to make a torpedo attack. But Johnston has already fired all her torpedoes. With one engine and half her guns out of commission, she can't keep up with the other destroyers making their runs. A rational commander would pull back, would try to save his ship and crew. Evans is not a rational commander. He's a fighting commander. We'll go in with the destroyers, he booms, and provide fire support. Johnston turns back toward the enemy. What follows is a battle that defies all logic, all probability, all reasonable expectations of what a crippled destroyer can accomplish. Johnston emerges from a smoke bank and nearly collides with USS Heermann, missing her by less than 10 feet as both ships maneuver wildly. The smoke is so thick that Evans orders his gun crews to hold fire unless they can actually see a target. At 8:20, a target appears, a 30,000-ton Congo-class battleship, just 7,000 yards off the port beam. Johnston opens fire. Her 5-inch shells, designed for destroyers and aircraft, bounce off the battleship's armor belt like pebbles off tank armor. But they hit the superstructure, they shatter rangefinders, they force the battleship to turn away to avoid what might be a torpedo attack. Every second the battleship is turning is a second it's not firing at the carriers. At 8:30, Johnston sees the escort carrier Gambier Bay under heavy fire from a Japanese cruiser. The carrier is being methodically destroyed, shell by shell, unable to run, unable to hide, unable to fight back. Evans gives what his gunnery officer will later call the most courageous order he ever heard: commence firing on that cruiser. Draw her fire on us and away from Gambier Bay. Johnston charges in and opens fire. It's a deliberate, suicidal decision. Johnston, already crippled, engages a heavy cruiser in a direct gunnery duel. The shells exchange. Johnston lands 4 hits before breaking off, not because she's won, but because something even more urgent has appeared. A Japanese destroyer squadron, 5 ships, closing rapidly on the carriers to launch torpedoes. Evans doesn't hesitate. He orders Johnston to intercept. The destroyer is listing, smoking, engines barely functioning, but she turns and charges straight into 5 enemy destroyers in good condition. It's insane. It's hopeless. It's exactly what Evans intends to do. Johnston engages the lead Japanese destroyer, pouring fire into her until the enemy ship turns away. Then she shifts fire to the second destroyer, hammering it until it too breaks off. The remaining Japanese destroyers, confused by the ferocity of this crippled American ship that refuses to die, launch their torpedoes early, from extreme range, and all of them miss the carriers. Johnston has single-handedly disrupted an entire squadron's attack. But the price is mounting. At 8:50, 6-inch shells from the light cruiser Yahaji slam into Johnston's bow, knocking out one of her remaining guns and starting a fire so intense that the bridge has to be evacuated. Evans moves his command station to the fantail, to the very back of the ship, where he can still shout steering orders. The ship's interior communications are destroyed, so men relay orders by voice, screaming over the din of battle, passing commands from the fantail through open hatches to men in the after steering compartment who turn the rudder by hand. Johnston is burning now. Shells have opened her hull in dozens of places. Water sloshes through the lower decks. The remaining crew fights fires, patches holes, and keeps the guns firing. They know, everyone knows, that they're not going to make it. But they also know that every minute Johnston stays in the fight is another minute the carriers have to escape, another minute for aircraft to launch, another minute for help to arrive. At 9:10, Japanese cruiser Yahaji hits Johnston with another salvo. The shells smash into what remains of the forward superstructure, opening more wounds, starting more fires. Johnston's list increases. Water pours through shell holes below the waterline. The pumps can't keep up. Men abandon the lower decks as compartments flood. The forward magazine is awash. The ship is dying by degrees, but she's still moving, still firing, still fighting. At 9:20, a shell hits Johnston's number 1 boiler room. Steam erupts in a scalding cloud. The men inside die instantly, their screams cut off before they can draw breath. The last functioning boiler goes offline. The lone surviving engine, already damaged, loses steam pressure. Johnston's speed bleeds away. 17 knots becomes 10. 10 becomes 5. Then she's wallowing, barely making way through the water. The Japanese destroyers circle like wolves around wounded prey. They're so close now that Johnston's gun crews can see individual sailors on their decks. The 5-inch guns keep firing, traversing left and right, selecting targets, engaging. But without power, without steam, without the ability to maneuver, Johnston can't escape the inevitable. Shells pour in from multiple directions. The forward gun takes a direct hit and falls silent. The 40mm ready ammunition locker explodes, obliterating what's left of the bridge structure. At 9:45, Commander Evans, standing on the fantail, blood-soaked and battered, gives his final order, abandon ship. The crew doesn't panic. They've known for hours this moment was coming. Men help the wounded over the side. They grab Kapok life jackets, throw over rafts, cut away debris that might float. Lieutenant Jesse Cochran later remembers seeing a pile of bodies on the deck, half alive, half dead, men too wounded to move but conscious enough to know what's happening. The uninjured carry them to the rail and lower them into the water as gently as possible. Evans moves among his men, calm despite the catastrophic wounds he's sustained. The 2 fingers torn from his left hand hours ago have left his shirt sleeves soaked with blood. Burns cover his back and arms. Shrapnel wounds pepper his face. But he shows no pain, offers no complaint. He helps men over the side, gives quiet words of encouragement, ensures the wounded are being cared for. It's what he's always done. It's who he is. At 10:10, Johnston rolls to port. Her bow dips beneath the surface. Water rushes through open hatches and shell holes. The men in the water, those who can still move, swim away from the ship, knowing the suction of a sinking vessel can drag swimmers down with it. They watch their home, the ship they've served on for exactly 1 year, slide beneath the waves. As Johnston's stern rises into the air, propellers still visible, a Japanese destroyer approaches. The survivors brace for machine gun fire. They're helpless, floating in the water, easy targets. But the destroyer doesn't fire. Instead, as Johnston makes her final plunge, the Japanese crew comes to attention on deck. Officers salute. Survivor Clint Carter, treading water, sees a smartly dressed officer on the wing of the bridge, possibly the captain of the destroyer Yukikaze, holding a perfect salute as the American ship disappears. The Japanese sailors have just spent 3 hours trying to kill Johnston. Now they honor her. Now they recognize what they've witnessed. A level of courage that transcends nationality, that commands respect even from an enemy. Survivor Bill Mercer watches his home for the past year slowly slide below the surface. The last thing visible is the tip of Johnston's mast, her flag still flying. Then nothing. Just empty ocean and the sound of men calling for help. 141 men are now in the water. They cling to rafts, debris, life jackets. Some are wounded, bleeding into the sea. All are exhausted from 3 hours of combat, from damage control efforts, from the sheer terror of being under fire from ships that could obliterate them with a single salvo. The battle is still raging around them. Shells continue to fall. Aircraft strafe Japanese ships. But for Johnston's crew, the fighting is over. Now comes a different kind of battle. Survival. Commander Evans makes it to a life raft. Multiple survivors see him. He's badly wounded but conscious, still giving orders, still trying to help organize the men in the water. But the wounds are severe. The blood loss is catastrophic. Somewhere in the hours that follow, Ernest Evans, the Cherokee from Oklahoma who fought prejudice to command his own ship, who promised his crew he would take them into harm's way, who charged a battleship fleet without hesitation, disappears. Some survivors claim they saw him in the water. Others say he was in a damaged motor whaleboat. What's certain is that he's alive when Johnston sinks and dead when rescue arrives. He's never seen again. The survivors float in shark-infested waters. The Kapok life jackets are rated to remain buoyant for about 20 hours. On the morning of the second day, 18-year-old seaman Bill Mercer takes off his life jacket and watches it slowly sink beneath the surface. The sun is merciless. Men broil during the day, shiver at night when the temperature drops. Salt water stings wounds. Dehydration sets in. Men begin drinking seawater, which triggers hallucinations, convulsions, death. The visions are vivid and varied. Some men see native girls bringing tropical fruit. Others see cases of beer, bars just down the street, fresh water fountains that don't exist. A few see Commander Evans on a mountaintop and swim away to join him, disappearing into the depths. Survivor Glenn Parkin, 89 years old when interviewed decades later, fights back tears remembering what it was like when men died. You would take off their dog tags, he recalls, and they would float 3 or maybe 5 feet away before the sharks got them. George Miller says his group would release the dead at night to spare themselves the agony of watching sharks take their comrades. By the second night, it's every man for himself. The conversation dies away. The prayers cease. Men who help the wounded onto rafts now wait for the wounded to die so they can take their place. The will to survive overrides everything else. 92 men who are alive in the water after Johnston sinks are never heard from again. Sharks, exposure, dehydration, and wounds take them one by one. Commander Evans is among them. There's no immediate search for American survivors because naval commanders worry Japanese vessels still control the waters. The battle off Samar has ended in an American victory. Admiral Kurita has inexplicably turned his fleet around and retreated through San Bernardino Strait. But nobody knows that for certain in the immediate aftermath. Rescue operations are delayed while commanders assess the situation. For 50 hours, Johnston's survivors drift. They hoard their very signal lights, seeing aircraft overhead but remaining unseen. Current and wind carry them away from the battle area. Through the daylight hours of October 25th, search vessels comb the ocean without success. It's the very signals, fired at night when they're most visible, that finally guide the rescue force in the proper direction. On October 27th, 50 hours after Johnston sank, landing craft infantry vessels from the rescue task force finally retrieve 141 men from rafts and debris. They're burned, dehydrated, wounded, traumatized. Many require immediate medical attention. All have been changed forever by what they've experienced. Out of Johnston's complement of 327 men, 186 are lost. About 50 were killed by enemy action during the battle. 45 died on rafts from battle injuries sustained before the ship sank. 92, including Commander Evans, were alive in the water but never made it home. The battle off Samar is over. The numbers tell part of the story. Taffy 3, the small escort carrier task unit, has lost 2 escort carriers, Gambier Bay and St. Lo, 1 destroyer, Johnston, 1 destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts, and suffered heavy damage to others. Over 1,000 American sailors are dead. But Admiral Kurita's center force, which should have annihilated Taffy 3 and destroyed the invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf, has retreated. 3 Japanese heavy cruisers are sunk or crippled. The Japanese formation is shattered, disorganized, demoralized. The invasion beaches are safe. General MacArthur's troops continue landing unopposed. Historians will spend decades trying to understand why Admiral Kurita turned back. His force still had overwhelming firepower. He could have pressed the attack, could have reached the troop transports, could have turned the invasion into a catastrophe. But he didn't. The ferocity of the American counterattack, the suicidal charges by destroyers like Johnston, the relentless air attacks from the escort carriers, the apparent presence everywhere of American ships fighting with a desperation Kurita had never encountered, convinced him he was facing a much larger force than actually existed. The tin can sailors, the escort carrier pilots, the destroyer escorts, they had bluffed the Japanese into retreat. This episode was brought to you by the stories these brave sailors left behind. If you enjoy learning about forgotten World War II moments, consider supporting the channel by subscribing and sharing this video with others who appreciate real history. Commander Ernest Evans is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, in part, seriously wounded early in the engagement, Commander Evans, by his indomitable courage and brilliant professional skill, aided materially in turning back the enemy during a critical phase of the action. His valiant fighting spirit throughout this historic battle will venture as an inspiration to all who served with him. He's the first Native American in the United States Navy to receive the Medal of Honor. He's one of only 2 World War II destroyer captains to receive the nation's highest military honor. Johnston receives the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest award that can be given to a ship. The citation acknowledges the extraordinary heroism of the entire crew in the face of insurmountable odds. 6 battle stars are awarded for Johnston's service in various campaigns throughout the Pacific. The ship is struck from the Navy Register on November 27, 1944. The survivors carry the memory of that morning for the rest of their lives. They gather at reunions of the USS Johnston Hole Association, fewer each year, remembering friends who didn't make it home. They tell their stories to historians, to authors, to journalists who want to understand what happened off Samar. They insist that people remember Commander Evans, remember what he did, remember what all of them did. In September 1945, Evans' widow, Margaret, accepts the Medal of Honor on his behalf as their 2 sons look on. She receives a flag, a medal, and the knowledge that her husband died doing exactly what he'd promised to do, taking his ship into harm's way. The Cherokee from Pawnee, Oklahoma, who overcame prejudice to graduate from the Naval Academy, who commanded with quiet authority and fierce determination, who charged a battleship fleet to protect men who couldn't protect themselves, is gone. But the story survives. For 75 years, Johnston rests on the seafloor of the Philippine Sea. The ship lies in 21,180 feet of water, over 4 miles down, on the edge of the Philippine Trench, one of the deepest submarine trenches on the planet. It's the deepest shipwreck in history. In October 2019, the research vessel Petrel, owned by Vulcan Incorporated, locates what they believe is Johnston's wreckage. The debris field is so extensive, so completely decimated, that positive identification proves difficult. In March 2021, explorer Victor Vescovo, a former Navy commander who's made a career of deep-sea exploration, pilots his submersible limiting factor down to the wreck. The titanium pressure hull withstands pressures that would crush a normal submarine. Over 2 8-hour dives, Vescovo films and surveys the ghostly remains. The ship's hull number, 557, is clearly visible on both sides of the bow. The rear third of the ship is missing, blown away by an 18.1-inch shell from Yamato. 5-inch gun turrets remain in place, still trained to starboard in the direction of the enemy when Johnston sank. Empty torpedo racks testify to the all-out nature of the fight. Holes from 6-inch shells puncture the hull beneath where the bridge once stood. Vescovo sees no human remains, no clothing. 7 to 7 years in crushing pressure and near-freezing water has dissolved everything organic. But the ship itself remains, a metal monument to courage, to sacrifice, to the kind of fighting spirit that refuses to yield even when defeat is certain. The Naval History and Heritage Command confirms the identification. This is Johnston. This is where she made her last stand. At the conclusion of Vescovo's expedition, his research vessel comes to a stop in the vicinity of the battle. The ship's whistle sounds. A memorial wreath is laid on the ocean's surface, directly above where Johnston rests. It's a small gesture, inadequate to the magnitude of what happened here, but it's all that can be offered. The dead are honored. The story is preserved. In November 2023, Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro announces that a new Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer will be named USS Ernest E. Evans, designated DDG-141. The announcement comes during National Native American Heritage Month. The ship is currently under contract, expected to be commissioned in the early 2030s. Another Johnston will sail, another Evans will be remembered. Native American history is American history, Del Toro says, and today's designation ensures that the story continues to be told. The battle off Samar has been called the last stand of the Tin Can sailors. It's been called the greatest upset in naval history. Retired Rear Admiral Samuel Cox, director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, calls it an example of sheer, raw courage, of honor, commitment, and valor that turned back a superior enemy force during a critical phase of the war. The actions of Johnston, Hull, Heerman, Samuel B. Roberts, the 4 destroyer escorts, and the pilots flying off the escort carriers saved the latter invasion and shortened the war. Commander Ernest Evans never promised his crew they would survive. He promised them they would fight. On October 27, 1943, at Johnston's commissioning ceremony in Seattle, he stood before his assembled crew and said, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." The men cheered. Exactly 1 year and 2 days later, Evans kept his promise. He took his ship into harm's way. He engaged an enemy fleet 7 times his weight in metal and firepower. He refused to retreat, refused to surrender, refused to stop fighting until his ship was destroyed beneath him. And in doing so, he and his crew changed the course of a battle, protected thousands of soldiers on the beaches, and demonstrated that courage isn't measured by the size of your guns but by the size of your heart. An unidentified Johnston crewman, interviewed after the war, summarized Commander Evans perfectly. The skipper was a fighting man from the soles of his broad feet to the ends of his straight black hair. He was an Oklahoman and proud of the Indian blood he had in him. The Johnston was a fighting ship, but he was the heart and soul of her. 4 men flew out from the Burma jungle and 4 men flew home. 141 men floated in the Philippine Sea and 141 men were rescued. But 327 men sailed into battle off Samar, and only 141 came home. The difference between those numbers is measured in courage, in sacrifice, in the willingness to stand between the enemy and the defenseless, knowing the cost, accepting it anyway. Commander Ernest Evans never rammed the Yamato. The title promised something that physics and naval combat don't allow. A tin can destroyer colliding with a battleship and surviving would have been impossible. But metaphorically, spiritually, tactically, Evans did exactly that. He charged straight at the largest battleship ever built, absorbed its fire, disrupted its attack, and forced it to turn away. He interposed his 2,700-ton destroyer between 72,000 tons of Japanese steel and the carriers he was sworn to protect. He rammed his will against Yamato's might, and his will proved stronger. That's the story the title promised. That's the story the historical record confirms. A destroyer didn't physically ram a battleship, but a commander and his crew rammed their courage, their skill, and their lives into an impossible fight and won a victory that logic says they couldn't achieve. They proved that in war, as in life, the size of the ship matters less than the size of the fight in the hearts of the men who sail her. If stories like Commander Evans' sacrifice matter to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps us continue bringing these forgotten moments of heroism to light, ensuring that the courage of men like these is never forgotten. The Johnston rests for miles down, in eternal darkness, in crushing pressure, in water so cold it would kill a human in minutes. But the story survives. The memory survives. The example survives. And perhaps that's the real victory, not just that Evans and his crew stopped a Japanese fleet on October 25, 1944, but that 7 years later, we still remember why they fought, what they fought for, and what they proved about the human capacity for courage in the face of certain death.